How people stayed cool before air conditioning. Life in the 1800s. Ever wondered how people survived the blazing summers before air conditioning? Imagine a world with no fans buzzing overhead, no window units humming, and no thermostat to set at the perfect temperature. Yet, people managed to live, work, and even thrive in the heat. Hi everyone, Historian here. Today, we're taking a long journey back in time to explore the clever tricks, ingenious designs, and everyday habits that kept Americans cool in the 1800s. From shady porches and ice deliveries to sleeping on rooftops and wearing linen suits, you'll see how life before AC was all about adaptation, patience, and creativity. So grab a cold drink, sit back, and let's chill out with this special episode of Rewind Historian. Picture a sweltering July afternoon in the 1880s. The sun is beating down, cicadas hum loudly in the trees, and the air feels heavy. Inside a Victorian home, windows are thrown wide open, while outside, a family sits on a wraparound porch in rocking chairs, hoping to catch the slightest breeze. For them, that porch isn't just a pretty architectural feature, it's survival. Porches were like outdoor living rooms. Families gathered there to eat meals, relax, or even nap when the inside of the house became too stifling, and these weren't rare. In fact, by the late 19th century, porches were almost universal in American home design. The logic was simple: shade equals comfort, but porches were just one piece of the puzzle. Houses themselves were designed to breathe. High ceilings allowed heat to rise away from people. Tall, narrow windows caught breezes and funneled them through the home. Many houses were built with central hallways and perfectly aligned doors from front to back. Throwing those doors open could turn the entire home into a giant wind tunnel. Builders studied local wind patterns carefully, designing homes to harness the natural airflow. Another clever detail was the transom window, a small window set above interior doors. These could be cranked open to let hot, stuffy air rise up and escape while the door itself stayed shut for privacy. It's a detail we rarely see in modern homes, but back then, it was a small but mighty cooling system. Now let's talk about managing sunlight. People treated their houses like living beings, opening and closing them depending on the time of day, even dressing them for the season. In winter, houses were wrapped in heavy velvet curtains that trapped warmth inside. But come summer, those curtains were swapped out for gauzy white drapes that let air circulate while softening the sun's glare. Exterior shutters were pulled tightly closed during the hottest part of the day to keep sunlight off windows, then opened again in the evening to welcome in the cooler night air. And starting after the Civil War, canvas awnings became wildly popular. You've probably seen those iconic striped awnings in old photos of New Orleans or New York, yes. They looked stylish, but they also served an important purpose. By shading the glass windows, awnings could noticeably lower indoor temperatures. Even landscaping played a huge role in natural cooling. Families planted tall deciduous trees on the sunniest sides of their homes. In summer, the leafy canopies shaded the house, while in winter, bare branches let sunlight in. In the South, homes were sometimes raised on stilts to lift living areas off the hot ground. Wide eaves and breezeways funneled air through the home, creating constant ventilation. Every detail, cupolas, vents, attics, was meant to coax hot air upward and out. Of course, cooling wasn't only about buildings. It was about lifestyle. When the mercury climbed high, life simply slowed down. Shops closed during the hottest hours of the afternoon. Streets went quiet. Families retreated indoors or onto shady verandas. In the South, this daily pause was the closest thing to a Spanish siesta. By evening, life revived. Families dragged their supper tables out onto porches, neighbors sat on stoops and chatted, and children played outside until dark. In the cities, relief was harder to come by. Apartments were small, airless, and overcrowded. During brutal heat waves, families sometimes slept outside on rooftops, fire escapes, or even in parks. New York inspectors technically fined people for blocking fire escapes with mattresses, but desperate families often had no choice. During the notorious heat wave of 1896, some tenement rooms reached 120 degrees. People climbed up to rooftops to sleep in the open air, though tragically, a number fell to their deaths in the night. Public spaces also offered refuge. By the late 1800s, cities began building parks not only for beauty, but also as natural cooling zones. Shade, grass, and water features gave people somewhere to escape the oppressive heat of crowded neighborhoods. Public baths, first created for hygiene, became popular swimming and cooling spots during heat waves. But what about clothing? Looking at photos of the Victorian era, it's hard to imagine how people survived summers under all those layers. Men wore suits, long sleeves, and vests. Women wore dresses with petticoats and corsets. The trick was in the fabric. Clothes were made of lightweight, breathable cottons and linens. Summer outfits often shed extra layers. Sweat-soaked underclothes, uncomfortable as they sound, actually cooled people down as breezes evaporated the moisture. Light-colored fabrics, especially white, reflected heat. Think of the classic southern planter in a white linen suit. And don't forget the accessories. Broad-brimmed straw hats and parasols acted like portable shade. And of course, the handheld fan. Once a luxury item imported from Europe and Asia, by the late 1800s paper fans were mass-produced and handed out for free as advertisements. On a sweltering Sunday morning, an entire church congregation could be seen fluttering fans in unison. Another major innovation was ice. In the early 1800s, ice was a luxury for the wealthy. But thanks to entrepreneurs like Frederick Tudor, known as the Ice King, ice harvesting from New England lakes and ponds became a booming industry. By the mid to late 19th century, ice delivery was common in cities. Families kept ice in insulated ice boxes, which worked like an early refrigerator. This didn't just preserve food, it made summer a little more bearable. Cold lemonade, chilled watermelon, and ice cream became accessible treats. Ice cream parlors spread across the country, offering people sweet, icy escapes from the heat. Theaters and lecture halls sometimes placed giant blocks of ice in front of fans to blow cooled air toward audiences. Even President James Garfield, after being shot in 1881, had Navy engineers build a makeshift cooling device in his sick room. They blew air across ice and through cotton screens, lowering the room temperature by a few degrees enough to make him more comfortable during the blistering Washington summer. Inventors were obsessed with creating mechanical cooling. In 1842, a Florida physician named John Gorey built an ice-making machine to cool yellow fever patients. His design worked but was too ahead of its time to catch on. By the 1880s, engineers were tinkering with fans. Philip Deal, an engineer for the Singer Sewing Machine Company, attached fan blades to a sewing machine motor and mounted it on the ceiling, creating one of the earliest ceiling fans. But with electricity still rare, many fans were human-powered or fueled by oil and kerosene. Some were clockwork fans that ran on springs for half an hour. Others were pedal-powered contraptions. There was even a rocking chair fan that created a breeze each time you rocked back and forth. People were willing to try anything to keep cool. Of course, not everyone had equal access to these comforts. The wealthy had the ultimate solution: escape. By the late 1800s, wealthy urban families fled to seaside cottages, mountain retreats, or lakeside resorts during summer. Middle-class families also began taking advantage of the railroads, spending a week at the shore or a lakeside camp. City neighborhoods would empty out as residents disappeared to cooler retreats. Looking back, it's impossible not to admire the resilience and ingenuity of people before air conditioning. They adapted their homes to breathe, adjusted their clothing to stay bearable, slowed their daily rhythms, and harnessed natural elements like wind, shade, and ice to survive the dog days of summer. So the next time you flip on your AC or step into a cool, air-conditioned room, take a moment to remember the people who endured summers without it. Their creativity kept them going, and their designs still influence how we build homes today. And with that, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, give this video a like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss another episode of Rewind Historian.